Hi all, welcome back to Oops with C++ session 31. In today's session we will see default argument constructor and we will see how to write conversion constructor and how to avoid the conversion. Okay, so then what is default argument constructors? So we have already seen the default argument functions. So in the same way, when the constructor is having default values in the arguments list, then we can call it as default argument constructor. Okay, so where we have to provide the default argument constructor, where we have to provide the values means we have to provide the values for the default argument constructor in the function constructor declaration only, not in the definition. Okay, so when we have this default argument constructor, this will behave as a zero argument constructor as well as parameterized constructor also. It's based on the argument list we are passing. Okay, now just see one example here, how it will be, how we can write a default argument constructor. Okay, so now just observe this program. I have class C employee class, and we have one parameterized constructor which is taking two arguments. One is integer and another one is constant character star. So and we have display function, two data members, employee ID and employee name, and we have the parameterized constructor here giving the definition. Okay, so now so here display function is there, and in main what we are doing is I'm creating the object for C employee emp1 and using emp1 dot display. So currently I just commented these two lines, emp2 related lines. Okay, so now when I say C employee employee1, what it will do is the compiler will search for the zero argument constructor. But if we have observed our class, we don't have any zero argument constructor. We have only parameterized constructor. So what we are expecting here is it should throw an error, right? So there is no zero argument constructor. Okay. So let's see whether it will throw an error or not. See, you can see error at line number 23. This one. Here we are facing the error. So what is that error? No matching function for call to C employee. What is this? So there is no zero argument constructor. So what is the constructor present? We can see this one, C employee int ID and constant character string. That is this zero argument constructor, sorry, parameterized constructor we have provided, but there is no zero argument constructor. Okay, so here now what I will do is I will comment this parameterized constructor. Okay, commenting it. Okay, so now I have commented this one, compiling it. Let's see whether it will work or not. Now it is working, no compilation error. Dot out, it's giving the default values, some garbage values. Okay, so what is the conclusion from this? When we have not given any one parameterized constructor, means if your class doesn't have any parameterized constructor, then your compiler will provide the zero argument constructor. But if you have at least one parameterized constructor defined inside your class, then your compiler won't provide the zero argument constructor. Then it is our responsibility to provide zero argument constructor also. Okay, so now I have provided the constructor. Now the compiler won't provide the zero argument constructor. Because of that reason, I will face errors. I will get error for this. See, there is no match. But if I have commented this parameterized constructor, or if I have not provided any parameterized constructor inside the class, then this program will work, because that time compiler will provide the zero argument constructor. Okay. Now, coming to our topic, zero argument constructor. So, sorry, default argument constructor. As I said, a constructor which is having default values. Say, for example, I am giving default values to this. and here I am giving some default values. Okay, maybe default. Okay, so a constructor which is having default values will be called as default argument constructor. So here for this constructor I have given the default values. So for the first argument I have given 100 as the default value. For second argument I have given the default as the default value. Okay, so now let us see whether this program will work or not. Now it is working fine. Okay, how come it is working fine but it is showing 100 default? How it is working? I have not provided any zero argument, right? But here in this line it will call the zero default argument constructor. So we know that the default argument function, any default argument function will be called with less number of arguments also. So now if we have provided all the default values to all the arguments present in this constructor, then no need to write a separate constructor for this. Now you can call this one like this. Now the same constructor will work like a zero argument constructor. Now what I'm doing is here I am uncommenting this. Now the same constructor will work like a parameterized constructor. So this default argument constructor is working as a zero argument as well as normal parameterized constructor also. So if we have here we are not passing the arguments, then the compiler will take the default values, and here we are passing the arguments for the employee to, then it will take the same 101 and Richie. Okay. So if you have any doubts on the default argument functions, please refer my sessions, previous sessions. Okay. So now let's compile this program and see what is the values printed for EMP1 and for what is the values printed for EMP2. No issues. See 100 default, 101 Richie. So because for employee 1 we are not passing any values, then it will take the default values. So same this function will work as a zero argument as well as parameterized constructor. Okay, so this is how we can write default argument constructor. Now there is one more point here. So what I'm doing is I am writing say employee. Okay, some zero argument constructor I'm specifically writing. Okay, so I'm not giving any definition, just to, okay. So now let's see what will happen to this program. See here, ambiguous. Okay, error call to overload C employee is ambiguous. So why it is ambiguous? Because this method itself, this one itself will work as a, this default argument constructor will work as a zero argument as well as a parameterized constructor also. But when we have like this C employee employee one, now the compiler is getting confused whether to call this method, this constructor, or to this constructor. So that is the reason we are getting the ambiguity situation whether to call this or this. So when you are right, when you are providing default argument constructor, make sure that you are not providing the zero argument constructor. Okay, so that will leads to ambiguity situation. Okay, so now remove it. Okay, so our program is working fine. So this is default argument constructor. Okay, so don't get confused with the default constructor and default argument constructor. Default constructor means a constructor which is having zero arguments, and default argument constructor means a constructor which is having default values in the arguments. And if you have observed here, we have given the default values only in the constructor declaration, not in the definition. Okay, this is the thing we have to follow. Okay. Now after this, let's see another program which is yeah. Okay. So just observe this program. So what I did is I have on C employee int. So we have a constructor which is taking only integer as an argument. So currently I have not written any zero argument constructor, only single argument constructor I have written. Okay, so now simple C employee here int id. By default, some value I am assigning here employee name and employee ID equals to ID. Okay, so now what I'm doing is C employee emp1 equals to 101. So what is 101 here? 101 is an integer variable. Okay, but emp1 is of type C employee. Okay, so this is of different type. Okay, and this emp1 is of a different type. So now when we have the situation like this, then what will happen is the then the compiler will look for the constructor which is taking only one argument. So now this single argument constructor will be invoked and it will work like a conversion constructor. So the single argument constructor, whatever is there, that will behave like a conversion constructor. So now what this constructor will do, it will assign this 101 to emp1, means it is converting integer to C employee type, integer value to C employee type. So that is the reason we call it as conversion constructor C employee int. So we are converting integer value to emp1. So a single argument constructor will behave like a conversion constructor. Okay. Now let's see whether it will work or not. See 101 Satya. Okay, so what I have passed here 101 and here so this one will be invoked, this constructor, and ID is 101. This I 101 will be copied to emp ID and emp name is Satya. So same thing will be displayed. You can see once again. So 101 Satya. Okay, so this is called conversion constructor. So either it may be an integer or a constant character star. Okay, so is any single argument constructor will work like a conversion constructor. Now how can we avoid this? Okay, for that we have something like explicit. Okay, what we want is we don't want to do somebody to do this operation emp1 equals to 101 like that, we don't want to do. Then what we can do is we can write explicit keyword. Now just compile this program and see what is happening. Can you see here? So conversion from int to non-scalar type C employee requested. This is error. We cannot convert 101. It is of integer type to employee one, means C employee type. So both are different categories. Okay, you cannot convert. So it will throw the error. Okay. So then how can we avoid that? What I have to do now? You can write like this only. Now it will work. Okay, so that's why this one is called a single argument constructor, can also be called as conversion constructor. Okay, if somebody is trying to do like this emp1 equals to 101, so then and if you have provided explicit here, then that conversion won't happen, you will face an compilation error. Okay, so this is about conversion constructor and explicit. So this is also a special type of parameterized constructor only. Okay, so we have only two types of constructors: zero argument constructor, parameterized constructor. If a constructor is having arguments, then we can have we can say it is a parameterized constructor. If a constructor is not taking any arguments, then we can say it as a zero argument constructor. In under this parameterized constructor, we have discussed about default argument constructor as well as we have discussed about conversion constructor. So that is for today. Now come back to our slides. Okay, so we have discussed default argument constructors. Constructors with the default values in the arguments are called as default argument constructors. The default argument constructor will behave as zero argument as well as parameterizer constructor based on the argument list we are passing. So default values has to be given in constructor declaration only, not in the definition. Okay. So after default argument constructor, having default argument constructor with other constructor might lead to ambiguity situation. See, we have created one default argument constructor and also we have created one zero argument constructor. So then the compiler will get confused which constructor has to be called. That will leads to be ambiguity situation. Okay. Now conversion constructor we have discussed. So any single argument constructor will behave as a conversion constructor. So how it will be done? The conversion constructor invocation. So we have created the object like this, class name object equals to value. So we have provided some integer value. So that integer value is trying to will be trying to be converted to this class type. Okay, so that is allowed if we have a single argument constructor. But how can we restrict that? We can restrict that by providing explicit keyword, prefixing explicit keyword with the constructor name so that we can avoid the conversion. Okay, so that's for today. Okay, just quickly revise the points. A default argument constructor can work as a zero argument as well as parameterized constructor. And as long as there is no single parameterized constructor in the class, compiler will provide zero argument constructor. So if a single argument constructor will behave as conversion constructor, and we can avoid this conversion by prefixing explicit keyword with constructor. Okay, so that's for today. Thanks for watching.